Happy May Day, Aaron.
Happy May Day to you.
Have you organized your local factory into a union?
Nah, not yet. I'm working on
Slacking.
it.
The next best thing we can do is watch a bunch of movies from the 1960s by communist directors. It's anything for the
Yep,
cause.
I'm down for that.
I'm Eric Tronometer,
I'm Aaron Brown.
And I'm Sheila Blume.
and this is World Cinema History.
Once in a great while, a motion picture with the mark of greatness on it comes along to win the thunderous acclaim of press and public alike. Such a picture is The Organizer. Mark it must-see, said the New York Herald Tribune. One of the best movies of this and many a year. Mastroianni is masterly. It's a beautiful film. You owe it to yourself to see it. This is the picture the New York Post called one of the all-round best pictures of the year. Perfect, superior.
This week, The Organizer, directed by Mario Monticelli, a 1963 film in the neorealist tradition, but also a comedy. It takes place in the 1890s in Turin and surrounds a strike at a factory and a high school teacher who organizes a labor strike force. Well, Aaron, they don't make trailers like that anymore. Thank goodness.
Boy, that was an informative trailer, wasn't it? Told you all about the movie and, yeah.
All I learned is that Marcello Mastroianni is in it. All you needed to know about Italian film in 1963. Then let's see, Fellini's 8.5 was earlier that year, and of course the big hit from before was the Dolce Vita. Yeah, I guess the American distributors were like, oh, as long as everybody knows Marcello Mastroianni's in it, we'll sell as many tickets as an Italian film would. Gee, it's no wonder this was actually a bomb.
I have never indulged myself too much into Mastroianni, even though I know his name for quite a while. But I found his performance quite good. It starts in a very subdued manner for him, but I think he did a very good job. I'm more interested in the mixed message approach about what education is and about what working is. I find that there are a couple of lines in the movie where I find they're making solid statements, maybe just subjectively, but I'm just reading from my notes. I wrote, you must realize that becoming educated is also about acquiring discipline and self-control. I don't have a context for this line, but I know that I heard it and I found that very interesting, especially after finishing the film, because on the other hand, you have also the line, man is the only animal who has to work. Considering the time, the 60s, the message that I'm getting is very much as to what work is, which I have my very difficult opinion and thoughts about what work is, which does not coincide with what I see here. It actually coincides with what I see here in terms of my criticism of the term to work. I don't know if that's just me with my crazy way of looking at things, or if that's the same for everyone. when we see the young man getting up and writing, he's commanded to write something on the board, and he ends up writing something that the king is dead or something like that.
Murder the king.
Yeah. They're adults who are being taught how to write. My question is, how can he write with such a beautiful handwriting? I found that very interesting because to me that doesn't make any sense, that this man who cannot write writes like that. But all in all, what interested me the most from my perspective, this effort to address what is work, the dependency on working as we see it from both sides, from those in charge of the factory and the owners of the factory, as well as from the workers. And a few statements that are thrown around during the film that I find very interesting about what it is to work and how important it is for humans to work.
Thanks, Scylla. And the director, Mario Monticelli, was a committed communist. But in his own words, he only made films with one plot. And ironically, that one plot was the inability of a group of people to act in concord to get anything done. His biggest hit, Big Deal on Madonna Street, which was where Marcello Mastroianni got his start, really. It was his big breakthrough role, was about a group of burglars who bungled a heist. This is about the failure of a union to be able to cooperate. I mean, this was just the repeated theme. It's very interesting you keyed in on this idea of what is work and what is labor, because when we get to talking about how this evolved out, this style of film, this Commedia all'Italiano, what Monticelli himself called neo-realist farce evolved out of the neo-realist movement. It's really all about the very question that you're asking, what is work, what is considered the dignity of work. So you have the contrast of management versus the factory worker versus the sex worker, and to Monticelli and to the co-writers of the screenplays, Age and Scarpelli, all work carries dignity. That is, I think, a constant theme, but we'll come back to that later in the program. But really good start. Aaron Brown, since you were somebody who enjoyed the film we did 2 weeks ago that inspired me to choose this, Shankora Domani, thank you for the 90 or so people who corrected me on my Italian pronunciation. If you saw the same links that I did when I chose this film, because I really kind of felt that the two paired very, very well.
I think they do pair very well. I was surprised at how funny this one was, because I wasn't sure at first, but I mean, it's got all those little bits that are so great, and being able to use the humor with the drama really brings the message across really well. I thought it was great. You keep picking winners, man.
It seems like every time somebody throws anything in this film, it hits somebody, which I just think is awesome, because how many times have you seen somebody throwing something in a movie and you're like, what, and there's a room full of people, it's like, well, and it didn't hit anyone?
Yeah, it had that goofy slapstickiness to it that was like, I love when they were throwing the coal, and Tasso was throwing huge things like, watch your heads, and he'd throw a railroad tie and stuff. That was just so odd and so goofy, but it was a lot of fun to watch. And he was definitely my favorite character. I'm sad what happened to him.
But overall, what were your thoughts about the film?
It's another one that feels like it's still relevant. We're still having the same struggles in different ways, but the reason unions exist is because of the terrible conditions that people had to deal with. And employers will still try to get away with whatever they can. Which sounds like kind of dark, but I'm kind of dark. The older I get, the more socialist I go. So I'm a big fan of organizing to stop people from being exploited, and these folks were definitely being exploited, and it was really tragic to watch and trying to see them try to get out of their situation. Like, I had a lot of empathy for the Sicilian guy that lived in a hovel and wanted to work, and I love the scene when they broke into his house and then everybody just froze like, oh, this is how you're living. Oh.
And I laughed out loud at that scene. Because of the comic turn, they pound down the door and just like, oh, never
they
mind.
Just freeze, yeah.
Yeah, and
they just froze and saw it, and
it's sad, but
it
is. But the way it was filmed was just funny.
Yeah, because comedy will get a point across better than almost anything.
Here's me. Last week I was talking about how I thought telephoto lenses works better for comedy. This film is done completely in wide angles, and that's one of the better wide angle shots. And so, right on the tail of my saying that, Mario Monticelli and cinematographer Giuseppe Bertono have to do a master class on how to shoot comedy in wide angles. And that door coming in and then cutting to the reverse shot of just the squalor this family lives in is just comic perfection in terms of how it's framed, in terms of how it's edited, in terms of the performances. It's just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, it's something about comedy is it's really hard to constrain it. You can make comedy out of about anything, and so using the different lenses, it makes sense because it gave the look they're going for, and kept the humor. But it also had the drama and the pathos. When you see this family, you're like, oh shit, oh no, and they have to like stop, and you see the them shifting gears in their brain about what they have to do now. It was moving and funny at the same time. It was so great.
This film is one of, I think, 5 or 6 visual masterpieces that came out in the 1960s. I would rank this the same year Fellini's 8.5. I would say 1966's Persona. Orson Welles' Chimes at Midnight would be on that list. I think that the cinematography for Bonnie and Clyde would be on that list, just as a visual masterpiece. Bertuno, who earlier that year had done The Leopard for Luchino Visconti, which is very lush, very colorful, shot this almost in the exact opposite way. And the film begins with some real-life daguerreotypes from the 1890s, and through a combination of using high-contrast film stock, which we've talked about that in a couple episodes of the Chimes at Midnight, for instance. Orson Welles had experimented with the high-contrast film stock. The only thing that ended up in the film that he used it for was the opening scene, because he said that he just didn't feel like it could record performances the way that he wanted. But this also, and the flat lighting, the film from beginning to end looks like, and it's also in the way it's framed with the wide angle lenses, it looks like it was shot in daguerreotypes on glass, only we're watching it at 24 frames a second. We were talking about the anachronisms in Ciancora Domini. This is exactly the opposite. Every detail in this is meant to make you forget you're watching a movie and feel like you're in that period, in the 1890s in Turin. Everything down to that factory, which it was an actual working factory that they had to go all the way to Yugoslavia to find, and I guess they had to fix some things up and things like that so that it could run on steam. And the factory scenes, you are actually seeing what a factory from the 1890s in Turin would have looked like in that time. And that, of course, was part of the neorealist movement, was this idea, let's take things out of the studio, let's shoot real life, and let's make it feel like, the phrase I use for Ciancora Domini is, you can taste the dust, you can feel the gravel, you can smell the pasta cooking. How did that work on you? Or was it something that worked on a more subtle level? I'm going to start with Celia Bloom.
I don't capture that detail about the cameras and angles the way you do. I'm always surprised, not surprised by that. I just don't see that unless in the special cases of a lot of Ingmar Bergman, where I see a certain, to me, very clear focus on how I place the frame or the camera or the angle. But in this, I think I was more carried from the beginning with a very, very different view of what was going on, considering the fact, of course, that I didn't know really what the film was about. I had some idea. I had read about it, about the plot, but I really didn't know what to expect. So the first thing that I noticed was this making it kind of a historical documentary by showing all these pictures at the beginning, these old pictures. That gave me a very, very serious approach by which to look at the film. So when you talk about, for example, the comedic aspect of them going into the house of the Sicilian and figuring out or realizing, wow, that's how he lives. To me, that was not funny, not because I'm saying it was not, but because I had been paying attention to him for a long time. I had been fixated on his figure when everybody was having their food during their lunch break. He was just standing in the corner. There was something that attracted me.
When the fella asks him, did you have enough time to eat? And the guy, to be polite, says yes. And then the fella, not realizing the guy just is going without food, basically starving, says something off color about Sicilians wolfing their food down and not even tasting it.
Yeah, so I was looking at him with a very different sentiment. Throughout the film, I did see some comedy or some funny moments. For example, when the woman, I can't remember her name, she goes over the wall and she wants to help them throwing the things over. The way she goes down is like, in a way, was funny, but for me, it was just, okay, so I was just looking at the situation. For me, in many ways, I guess my mood watching most of the film was very much of a documentary. I was taking it very seriously, everything that was going on.
Like you were saying, where it looks like it was filmed on older equipment, that really stood out to me when they had the scene with the train, where they were throwing the coal and then the people from the other town came in and they're trying to stop the train and they have the big fights. It looked like an old silent film to me.
He even speeds it up to 16 frames a second. It's only a few frames at the 16 frames a second, so it's not hitting you over the head with, hey, I'm trying to make this look old. It's just enough so that, if you're not me rerunning scenes, if I haven't, I've seen the film 7-8 times in the last 30 years, you're just going to say, oh, that feels old-timey, as opposed to, oh gosh, look at me, I'm making this look like an old-timey movie.
Yeah, I thought it was subtle. A lot of what they did was, so I don't always notice things like camera angle and stuff, which sounds bad for a filmmaker, but I do rely on a cinematographer, because I focus on the writing and the dialogue and the direction and not necessarily the entire look, which sounds bad. I know it sounds bad.
It's not, if it were just lighting and lensing, then all we'd need is to hire a DP. We wouldn't need a director.
Exactly, yeah. So that's not necessarily where my focus is, but there were a lot of scenes that just looked really good. That, like at Pitasso's funeral or visitation or whatever it is, when they're in the house after he dies, the moment between Raoul and Adela, where it's in that stark black and white, that was just like that really drew me in.
And I think it changes the performances as well. People seem to move differently. This has a lot of actors that myself, as a film buff, have seen a lot in other films. The great French actor Bernard Blair, who plays Mark Nettie, the Judas, it turns out, of the Union, is been in at least 50 films that I saw. As a matter of fact, he and Marcello Mastroianni are in Luchino Visconti's adaptation of Albert Camus' The Stranger together, and he's also in Zed, or Z, the Costa Gravis film. And actually, his son, Bertrand Blier, is one of my favorite of the French directors, did a great film, I think, a great film called Going Places, that was the breakthrough role for Gerard Depardieu. It took me a bit to recognize him, even though I've seen him in like 50 films, and he moves differently. There's something about the way that this style of photography works. It changes the performances. And again, to me, I kept forgetting I was watching a film and felt like I was looking through a book of old photographs.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I mean, a lot of the way they set things up, darkness and light was a recurring theme. And when he's staying with the sex worker, her apartment was so black and white. It was so,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was played by Annie Girardot, who was also a great French actor. So, and both her and Blair are dubbed into Italian. They acted in French, and then were dubbed into Italian. So you're actually only getting a physical performance out of both of them. They're vocally doubled by Italian actors.
That's interesting. Another that does bring up something I did notice that really struck with me. It seemed like everybody was dubbed.
All Italian films are dubbed. Michelangelo Antonioni's films were all dubbed. Fellini's films were all dubbed. Sergio Leone's films, if you watch them in Italian or English, they're still going to be dubbed. They don't give a crap how their films sound. It's a visual film culture. You have to either get over that or not watch Italian films.
Yeah, and I'm not complaining about it, because the Foley to the soundtrack, the footsteps and everything, sounded weirdly good to me. It was like ASMR.
This was actually considered a lost film when I was a young person. The first time I saw it was over 30 years ago. We rented a print of it. It was a slightly different running length. I can't tell you what the difference was. We had to play it on a moviola because the 16mm print that we rented was so ragged we were afraid to put it through the projector, because we thought that the projector would rip the sprockets off of it, and the place that rented 16mm prints had a you break it, you bought it policy, and it was priceless because there was no other copy of this film within 1,000 miles. They had actually they had shipped it from Brazil for us. That soundtrack, no, not as good. Not as good. People sounded like they were gargling razor blades, and it had clicks missing, and the whole business. And yet, of course, it was still. I thought it was a masterpiece. I thought it was, and I sat through it twice, back to back, knowing full well I may never be able to see this film again. But then, of course, they restored this in 2012 for our good friends at Criterion, based on what's called a lavender print, which is a dupe of the negative. It happened to be in a vault, but in between, this was a lost film. You know, unless you did like we did and tracked down one of the 16mm pirate prints that had been made of it in the 1960s, you couldn't see this film until the restoration in 2012. And when they restored it, they restored that mono soundtrack to its original because they had it off of that lavender print. And yeah, they did just absolutely beautiful job. You're absolutely correct. Like the music also comes through so beautifully in this. You don't get that kind of scratchy, hiccupy sound that you associate with films from like the French New Wave or the Fellini's 8.5 and the Dolce Vita, which I always felt like it was a tragedy that Nino Rota's beautiful scores were made to sound so incredibly strained, even in the best prints. That is a very good point. That the Foley work on this was just absolutely top notch.
I just loved the way it sounded.
The head of the railroad unit, that little spit noise that he makes. Every one of those things had to be recreated after the fact in the studio, because the Italians they didn't own the Nagra equipment, hadn't made it to Italy because they didn't care. We talked about how the Nagra 2 revolutionized English cinema because it allowed for my beloved kitchen sink dramas to go out into the streets and actually record sound in the streets. Italy, they just took their cameras out and then they would sync it, and if when they post-dubbed it everyone's out of sync, it didn't matter because these were internationally financed and the cast was speaking 3 or 4 different languages anyway. They didn't give a crap how things sound, which I think, to something that Scylla said a couple of weeks ago, this might kind of reinforce what I was saying, which is that in Italy, when they're watching Shankara Dharmani, they probably didn't even notice the audio discrepancies that Scylla and I both did, because all Italian films to this day still sound like that.
Well, I guess every culture has its period of how we want it. You're saying the Italians, for some reasons that I really don't need to know right now, they don't focus so much on that. Somehow in their mind, making a film does not mean to have a perfect sound. Because I have watched films in Germany, I don't mean German films, but I've been in Germany in that circle of speaking German, and I've seen films. I've been in different places. So I have a certain expectation, not because I have traveled, but because that's who I am. That's what I mean with cultures. The way I am is that I don't want to see a mouth moving that does not correspond with the sound. I hate that. So when I produce a film, if I were to produce one, I would focus on that because I need that. And that's what I'm talking about. I think in different times, periods, in different culture circles, and different languages of art forms, there are certain expectations that for the Chinese might be very, very particular, and the Swedish don't give a shit. Excuse me that language, but that's what I'm talking about. They seem to have a different expectation, not just because of understanding the dialects, but because the weight for them is somewhere else.
So, let's talk about a bit about the one. Is the obvious big one is Marcello Mastroianni as Professor Sinigale. The opposite of every other Mastroianni performance I've ever seen. He's always the existential hero. They kind of based his look on Camus. If you think about him at 8.5 as Fellini's alter ego with the cool sunglasses and the hat. And even if you haven't seen the film, I'm sure you've seen the billion memes of him sitting at a party with the sunglasses on and just looking super cool, or the super cool reporter in La Dolce Vita with the existential angst, or literally playing Camus' Marechal in Visconti's adaptation of The Stranger, wearing sunglasses and looking very cool. And here he's this bedraggled. Even when he's arrested, he's not even allowed any dignity in that. He's got to be scrambling around for his glasses on the ground and unable to see while he's being dragged away by the police.
I've seen the movie only once, so it is very difficult for me to truly appreciate the quality of the film because my Italian is not good enough, so I must read, and I'm missing not a lot but quite a bit of what's going on because I have to read to know what they're talking about. And that's part of what I'm talking about with cultures and different directors or different uh, styles of making film. They all have certain demands that they have from themselves. And when I want and I need, for the most part, to listen and look at something in such a way that in my head they are comparable and not synchronized, that takes away for me from the quality of the piece. And I know that's my fault. That has nothing to do with the actors or the director, but I am missing something from this film. Same thing with Bergman. The difference is that Bergman tends to go much slower, and there's also I'm sure there's a certain culture in how to translate the film, so that you may get, when somebody says something, you might have to read 3 words or 10 words. That's a big difference between reading 3 words as opposed to 10 words. So you're missing a lot of information from your eye and from the performance from the actor when you have to read 10 words instead of 3.
This is filled with great physical performances. Blair, I mentioned as Martinelli.
Well, I think it's a great film. I enjoyed it very much. The acting, the story, I enjoyed many parts of it, many aspects of it. Even the cinematography, and like I said, that introduction with a lot of different pictures that made me feel that I was beginning to watch a documentary, a little bit like those films of the 60s that we were watching from England. I really enjoyed the film very much, and I enjoyed very much his performance, actually every performance.
About the subtitles, I do agree with Sela. You do miss things when you're reading the subtitles, but for me, it really didn't bother me that much, because if it had been dubbed into English, I think we would have lost a lot of the performances.
That is correct. That is correct,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, so I mean, even though it was dubbed anyway, hearing the cadence of Italian and just the way that they deliver the lines, it matches the physicality better than if they had dubbed it into English. And I really enjoyed it. I just, it didn't detract for me at all.
The point for me is that I need to find ways to listen and watch such a film at least 2 or 3 times, so I don't have that problem. So the problem is mine. It's not really the problem of the film. It's my problem that I don't speak Italian.
Yeah, and I agree with that too. A lot of times I need to watch something 2 or 3 times to really know what's going on.
Simon of the Desert.
I can watch it. Yeah, exactly.
It's not just in film, a film where they speak a language I don't speak, or a director style that I don't know. It's about everything. You cannot walk into a museum and watch a painting of Agnes Martin and get anything from that painting. You have to see it several times in different contexts. You need to, in the same thing with an opera, which is number 1 with those problems. You cannot just watch an opera for the first time and just get it. It just doesn't work that way. And I don't think that you can really say a film like Persona, or even, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a simpler film, but Persona, you cannot watch the first time and get it. Or the one, Cries and Whispers. The best way, in my opinion, to really grasp a little bit of what Ingmar Bergman is doing, or many other directors, Scorsese and many others, is when you watch certain films several times, so you can absorb the details, because number 1, you don't get every detail on the first viewing. It's just not possible. When I was somehow attracted to this Sicilian guy, I was missing a few other things because I was so focused on him.
Yeah, while you were watching the Sicilian guy, I was probably looking at somebody else on the screen, because I didn't get what his deal was for a while. And you're totally right. You got to watch something or read something or view something multiple times to understand it. And I also like to, if I really enjoy something, I like to read up on what other people think of it, because they'll catch things that I did.
Reading a book, I think, is a very different thing because you're reading at your own pace. You're at least the way I read. I take a lot of time reading. I never read fast. I am 100% in control of the timing of the perception and how I travel in my imagination with that book. But when you're watching a film or watching a symphony in a concert hall or any visual thing that you cannot control, then you're bound to miss certain things.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually just talking to my son about analyzing stuff. He's better at it than I am. And we were talking about how you have to, if something grabs your attention, then you got to think about it, look at it, and try to figure it out. I don't always do that. I always skip to the next thing. So I'm trying to learn how to analyze a lot better.
I think the analysis comes automatically when you repeat things, because you are automatically, and I think that happens to everyone, I think automatically when you see a film 7 times, you will see more each time. That you cannot avoid that. So once you see different angles of the same piece, you become automatically more analytical because you have seen more angles and you realize inside of yourself, wow, I didn't see that before. And that makes you more awake.
I'm not bothered by subtitles the way some people are, but I will say that some films, and this is one of them, I watched this film without subtitles before, when there was a version before it got taken down for copyright reasons by Criterion of this on YouTube with no subtitles, and I watched it all the way through and understood every single thing about it. I could do that with a handful of films. I think like Renoir's Grand Illusion, I've done that with. Understood everything about it. Fritz Lang's M, I watched it all the way through with no subtitles. Understood every single thing that went back, watched it with subtitles. Yeah, it was a richer experience, but I didn't miss anything. Great films like that can do that. Now, does that make that film greater than a film that maybe has deeper, richer dialogue that you have to have a translation to understand? Absolutely not. But I do think that this is a film that you can tell what's going on just by the physical performances, by the actions, and it is most of the comedy in this is physical. If you miss a line of dialogue here or there, you might miss a joke or two, but you're definitely not missing anything as far as the meaning of the film or the story goes. There's a phenomenon unique to watching this film, and it's something that goes back to 600 or 700 years before the Common Era, of how they used to make comedies. In the Shakespearean times, they called them mechanicals. This film, it's a half an hour before Mastroianni even shows up. Senegali doesn't even show up until a half an hour into this film, and when he does arrive, it's with absolutely no chutzpah. He's hobo in the back of the train, and they're throwing snowballs, and he ducks snowballs and just jumps off the train, looking nothing, with a shaggy beard and those glasses, and just looking absolutely nothing like what you expect Mastroianni to be. The first half an hour of this is like you are following these mechanicals in a Shakespeare play, as if the first half an hour of Henry the Fourth Part 1 and 2 and Henry the was just all set at the boar's head with and following Falstaff and Bardolph, and it's setting the groundwork, and a lot of those factory workers in true neorealist style aren't played by actors. They're played by the actual factory workers themselves. Another reason why they would dub Italian films is, of course, so that they could have an actor dub the dialogue and get the physical experience they want out of a real life working class person. But to me, that choice by both as a director, Monticelli, and as screenwriters, Ajay and Scarpatelli, uh, to kind of create that tableau for the first half hour. That opening scene, which is very comic, I think, where you're following, a 13-year-old boy gets awakened by his mother and told that he needs to go to work. Omero, we find out his name is, and he's very important to the plot. Aaron was very, very upset when he's killed in the final scene. Spoiler alert. No, we're not spoiling a 70-year-old movie. I don't think. But you follow him, and the comic element is that he's 13 years old, and it turns out his father is in jail, and he is literally acting as the man of the house. He's disciplining his brothers and sisters. But, his mother asks him for money, and he's chastising her for spending too much on groceries, and he's got to go and work at the factory. And it is a comic situation, but of course it's also tragic because, of course, this is way too much responsibility for and I say he's 13, I'm guessing, but he's a very young boy. He may be even younger, maybe 11 or 12. And you have a scene later in the film where he accosts the teacher and asks how his brother is doing, and when the teacher tells him that his brother's not doing well in school, but that he's smart and just doesn't apply himself, and he slaps his brother around and says, "I'll kill you rather than let you end up like me." Blows his brother's nose, puts his cap on, and carries his books for me, and you're seeing that this is a boy who is taking on far too much responsibility for his age, but you're also seeing kind of a tender side to him, and all of that is set up by that opening scene, and you have 6 or 7 of these little montages intercut with the real life scenes from the factory floor in this factory that they found that actually operates the same way a factory in the 1890s do. And you have a half an hour tableau of these mechanicals running through what could be considered almost comedy skits, and yet each and every single one of these, what looks like a comedy skit, like that opening, has a payoff. And Omero, sadly, is killed in the final protest, and the final shot shows that he has failed, just as everyone else has, because his brother has now taken, the brother that he wanted to keep in school has now taken over, and has to earn the money for the family. And as you see all the people marching back to the factory, you see Omero's little brother going, and the tragedy comes home just as much. But then you have the same with Mastroianni's entrance on the back of that train. Yes, the factory owners and the exploitation carries on, but the struggle carries on too, because you have Renato Salvatore at the end taking Mastroianni's place on that train, and you see him hopping a train and keeping the labor movement alive. You're right about this being one of those films you have to watch several times, because it seems like so many intersecting story times. But again, to Monticelli's quote, there's really only one story, and it's the same story of all of his films, which is a cooperative fails because human beings can't cooperate.
One of the reasons that it links so well with C'è ancora domani, they both end with it not being what you expect it to be, but there's still some hope that eventually it will be. That's what it felt like to me. Because, it was heartbreaking to see Omero's little brother going into the factory. And I'm just thinking, are they allergic to happy endings in Italy? There is that little bit of hope, because Raoul goes to continue Senegalia's work, which means that eventually somebody is going to get it right. And that's hopeful, I think.
I didn't see that hope. When the police are shooting, okay, it's an old film, and the orchestration or the choreography might not be what the director wanted to be in terms of perfection. But fact is, you have quite a few policemen, 30, 50, 100, I don't know, and quite a few of them, when they start shooting, they're not shooting up in the air. They're shooting basically into the crowd, which I found very weird because I was not expecting that. However, the negativity or the lack of hope for me is that even though they shoot not really not well, because there were a lot of people, so it makes no sense to me that only one person gets killed. They shot a lot of bullets, and only tragically this one child gets killed.
He is too bullheaded and young and doesn't realize the harm, and he's running actually where everybody else is running to safety. He runs toward the soldiers, waving his arms, thinking he can talk him out of it.
When the owner and the directors of the factory begin to feel the pain of the strike, the workers never get to experience that. They don't know that actually the owners and the directors, they're getting in trouble because of the strike. They're under pressure. They're not selling, they're not producing. And why is it that they couldn't somehow in the plot get to find out, oh, wait a minute, they're suffering. We're not the only ones suffering. We're not the only ones in need. They need us too, which is what Sigliani says at some point towards the end of the last third of the film. He says, that's your factory. It's not, you're not just working it. That is your factory. That is yours.
That's the comedy at the center of it. It is because these are all very flawed people. Senegalia is a great motivator. He's a terrible people person. You know, after Picasso's death, he shows up at the funeral going, "Hey, let's use this." You know, why is everybody down? And it's like, we're burying our friend. And obviously, you know, Erin mentioned that's her favorite character. This is a big personality that is lost. That this is the center of, you know, but then that he dies also because of a flaw in his character, which is he's too hot-headed. That's how he ends up getting run over by the train. And you see him from the beginning, you know, when he's the so-called whistleblower. He you know, you know, and he wants to be in charge so much, and it is a flaw in their character also. Niobe, Anna Jurido's sex worker character, has the information, and yet she also has Cassandra syndrome because no one will listen to her. Her own father, Martinetti, won't speak to her because she's a sex worker. And back to the kind of dignity of work element of this, of course, she's shown to be living a very similar lifestyle to the manager. Work is work and it pays. So yeah, the reason they don't know and can never learn about that is because of their own flaws in their character. Back to Monticelli's one plot throughout all these films, whether it's Big Deal on Madonna Street, this, Passionate Thief, the inability of cooperative action to work because of a fatal flaw in the human character. That's why the factory workers never learned that that management was actually on their knees and about to give. In that kind of Friends, Romans, Countrymen speech, he says, I have information that says that they're on their knees. Nobody's listening to him. And he can't tell them where they got it from because they're not going to believe that Niobe, the sex worker, is capable of knowing that information. And of course, he'd also have to answer a bunch of questions like, well, why is she telling you this? Not, I think, a flaw, and I don't think even sad, the human comedy of this film. Yeah, it's dark as heck. You know, seeing a 12, 13-year-old boy die is absolutely horrifying and awful, but it is the comic perplexities that lead to that I think make this film, and this is, to me, one of the great films ever made. I don't know if it would be on my top 10, but it would definitely be in any list that I made of great films because of the complexity of the scenes like that.
When I said that it had sort of a hopeful ending, everything that you're saying is correct about it being tragic. It is tragic as hell. For me, seeing Raoul get on that train, that was a sense of they may have lost the battle, but they'll win the war.
because what they're asking for is so tiny. They want an hour, they want to work 13 hours instead of 14 hours, some workman's comp. And the criticism of capitalism there is wonderful, because of course if this were actual capitalism, well, then those workers could go find a job somewhere that would only work them 13 hours a week. But this isn't real capitalism, is it? Because all of the factories in the city have conspired, as it's said, to make sure that everyone works the same hours for the exact same wages, and there is no competition. And that's why these workers are stuck with this, having to work for, because if it's not this company, the next company is going to treat them just as bad.
You could argue that that's what capitalism does.
But not under the definition that capitalism is supposed to be an open system of competition. This is the opposite of the definition of capitalism, because it's not an open system, it's a closed system. Now, you were corrected if that is what capitalism has become, but that is not a capitalist system. That is an oligopoly.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an oligarchy, but the bosses are still competing, but not when it comes to keeping wages low. They've agreed to keep the wages low, and I mean, whether it's they've decided to do that together, or if they just know that nobody's going to pay any more to get workers to come to them. They're still competing in the markets. They don't care about the workers. The workers don't enter into their view of capitalism. And so when I say that the workers ultimately won the war, it's because eventually unions did form, and they did start being able to put pressure on companies to treat their workers better and get things put into law, that like OSHA.
If anyone is listening to this episode in the future, first, hail to our robot overlords, and may they reign in justice forever. Second, the reason why we've done so many comedies this year, Google April of 2025 and just look at anything, and you'll realize that we're just not going to be able to handle a heavy film at this particular time. But yeah, they're undoing everything that these people died for, everything, and this film was researched very, very well, and it was not one 13-year-old boy that died, it was many. All the gains that were made on the backs of many, many people who died to give us these things, 40-hour work weeks, 5-day weeks, getting rid of child labor, all of these things are the things that they're attempting to undo now, not only in Europe, but in the United States, in Asia, in Africa, all around the world.
Mostly in the United States, we're seeing. I think it's the most drastic here in the United States because we've had these protections for so long, and having things being rolled back just arbitrarily with no logical basis behind it, just what this one douchebag thinks.
Do you know anybody who wants to make sneakers and t-shirts here in the wants that job in a factory? I'm not saying, now, if you take a poll of conservatives who say they want more people working in manufacturing in the United States, I'm sure you would find a majority. But I'm sure if you took a poll of majority of conservatives, you would have a very small minority of people who actually want to work in manufacturing at these type of jobs, as opposed to the service industry jobs that they have now.
Exactly. Nobody wants these jobs. I mean, they call them sweatshops for a reason. These are horrible jobs, and that's why we have protection, so that we won't have these. But that's why stuff costs more in the United States, because we have to pay the workers a certain amount. So you get the cheap stuff from China because they rely on slave labor from their prisons. Not that we don't here. I mean, don't get me started on the prison situation, but they want things that are not possible, and they want to blame people for it not being possible. And they don't want to think about a tariff being a tax on the consumers here in this country.
Workers of the world, unite. We have nothing to lose. Speaking of socialism, the film actually opened the 35th annual Italian Socialist Party convention, and was very, very divisive, because the socialists at that time were trying to break off from the communists, be a little bit more moderate, I think, because of electability, basically. And the communists and the socialists both thought the film was making fun of their inability to get along. So that's one of the reasons because of exactly what the film is making fun of, which is that they couldn't. Communism is a perfect example of how, and I'm not saying that because, of course, again, Monticelli was a lifelong. He lived to be 95 years old, and the day he threw himself out of a window and committed suicide, he was whistling La Internationale all the way down to when he hit the pavement. But
that was a thing I didn't know.
Well, he lived to be he was diagnosed with inoperable cancer, and he had done everything he could. His father had committed suicide, and he decided he wanted to end life on his own terms, and that detail seems too good to be true about him singing in La Internationale as he went down. But then the more of his films that I've watched, he was a drama queen. Yeah, I actually do believe that.
That's
ironically,
he did it his
he
way.
predicted exactly what happened over this film, which is, of course, the fascists hated it because it talked about workers' rights at all, and then the socialists hated it because they felt like he was making fun of them, and the communists hated it because they felt like he was making fun of them, and that when you look at the negatives don't get lost on films that people love and treasure and remember. This film was buried, basically. It got very good reviews. It was nominated for an Oscar for Best Screenplay here in the United States, where the title was changed from, which one of the few times I actually think the title was better in the United States as The Organizer, because obviously, that way you're talking about a single character. You're talking about Marcello Mastroianni. You're talking about Singoli. The original title translates as Comrades, which to me sounds like a 1920s, 1930s Russian communist propaganda film, and that's not what this is. And I think that the name The Organizer worked a lot better. But it bombed in the United States as well for the exact same reason, because the leftists thought it was making fun of them, and the right wing didn't like talking about labor disputes or rights. And so, ironically, for the exact reason that he is satiring in this film bombed, and the negative was lost for almost 50 years. Ironic, as the emperor would say.
Dang. That is wild. It's funny, because humans are ultimately very fallible.
If this had been about the what they called the white telephone movies, which was the upper class, they called them that in Italy because it always had some rich lady talking on a white telephone. He would have been satiring them, but this is neo-realist farce. The fact of the matter is, the whole point was to show working class lives, and the whole point of satire is to satire lives. And so if you're making a working class comedy, you are making a comedy that is going to, by necessity, satire the lives of working class people. And you're also showing people the lives of working class people, which not a lot of film outside of Italy at that time did. Quite honestly, I think of maybe the Apu trilogy, which I still say is unwatchable, but in India, Sajid Ray, I'm in a minority on that, I know, but I never understood why those films are considered masterpieces. I don't think socialist or communist films actually portray middle class and working class lives. They just portray symbols. And one of the reasons I think this failed with the left wing at the time is that they didn't want to see what these people's lives were like. They wanted their symbols for the fall of capitalism and the rise of communism, and but then you miss the theme, which is, of course, the same thing that he keeps repeating all the way through this, using Marcello Mastroianni's Singalia. You can't just sit back and wait for communism. It isn't some inevitable thing that's going to happen. You have to have boots on the ground. You have to have action. That's your factory. You built that factory. You have to seize the means of production. You can't just symbolically have the rich as the symbolic person taking the food out of the poor person's mouth. That's not going to change anything. They really wanted to simplify things into, the noble working class. And that's why I think so much of what became of neorealism outside of these people who turned to comedy ended up so saucy and sentimental. You looked at even some of the films that are considered masterpieces. I rewatched Umberto D, the Vittorio De Sica film, and there's a scene where the old man goes to beg, but his pride gets in the way, and so he changes his hand. He puts his hand out. Somebody's about to give him a coin, and he pretends like he checks like to see if it's raining. Like a Chaplin-esque kind of sentimental moment. I think of a similar moment in this film where Mastroianni takes out a piccolo just to make enough to get a piece of bread or something because he's so hungry that he plays in it. And the lack of sentimentality in the way that they present that. It's comic, yes, but you are actually seeing this is how the desperation that he's driven to at that moment, and it's night and day, which I'm going to prefer to watch of the two, because one is a real human being, Senegalia, who with real flaws, who I can identify with and see life with, and the other is just kind of a symbol for the misuse of the working class by the rest of the world. I'll get off my soapbox.
I feel like by wanting to see symbols, they're missing a valuable lesson. If you want to get it done, you got to stick together, you got to tough it out, and that's you see the failing of this particular strike. Learn from that. But if they're upset that, you're making fun of me and these aren't symbols, they're people, well,
and
they missed the point entirely.
If you want to see more films like this, where they Monticelli made quite a few. Dino Risa and Ettore Scola were pioneers, but the divorce Italian style, I think I'm thinking 61, it might have been 62. A film that got translated as The Easy Life in 1962, or Il Sorpassa, also in 62. Around this time, there was a trend towards these types of films. A small little, I would say, about the same size as those kitchen sink dramas we discussed so much last season when we were talking about British film. And all of them, I think, are excellent at exactly what you just said, which is getting across that point with satire and human beings as opposed to with symbols and didacticism and exposition.
That's one of the things that bother me in terms of that hopelessness, that submissiveness to have this energy, physical and from the spirit, not spirituality, but from the spirit of the soul, or the energy of the person, as well as the physicality. These people were workers. They were really determined to work. High class or lower class, it didn't matter. They wanted to work. And today we have a lot of people in the movies, just as an example, who are not actors. They might be famous for some weird reason, or they're singers, my point is, today we have a lot of the idea of labor is nowhere close to what it was in that period or even in the 60s. The industry, the entrepreneur today is not a physical situation. It's just when you're an influencer, to be an influencer, normally you have to know nothing. You just have to be able to influence people. That's it. The Kardashians, what do they do well? Nothing. I don't know if they studied anything. I don't know what they studied, and they know nothing, but they're influencers. When I think of how these people were determined to work, when the mother says to Homero, leave me some money because I have not enough, but she's working the whole day, but she doesn't get money for it. It was really labor what they were going through. And at the end of the film, they submissively go back to the factory. They open the gates and they walk in, everything is normal. That I found very tragic.
Senegali warns them, you never win the first time. At the beginning, he said, you never win the first one. They're gonna set up against it. They're gonna have their principles. You're never gonna win. This is an ongoing fight. And so, to Aaron's point, that is a hopeful ending because Raoul is continuing the fight, and because the spirit is in them now. Yes, Senegali is in jail. They're using a flute in the early Italian, because Italy was just a very new country. It was only about a 25-year-old country at that time. Italian laws, if he was run for and won a local seat in the government, they have to release him, and they're going to do that. Raoul is moving on to a new town and taking that spirit with him. So. Yes, the exploitation continues. Yes, the bosses are winning, but also the fight continues. When this film was made in the 1960s, there was huge labor strife going on exactly where it was filmed, in the auto industry. The exploitation never ends, but neither does the struggle ever end. And so in that way, I think this is kind of the perfect ending because, here we are 140 years later, and nothing has changed.
Yeah, that's the thing. There are still people that are being exploited because, look at America, where we're recording this. There are people that their circumstances mean they have no protections because they're not necessarily here with a work visa or anything like that. Undocumented immigrants still need to survive and need to work, but they're being exploited and villainized. And scapegoated and targeted right now. It's gotten horrific. But there's always been a class of people that are being exploited because they don't have the protections that other members of society have. And so the fight continues and continues and continues, and we just have to be aware of it and do what we can to help.
And it's not going to end. Neither side is going to win. It is cyclical. One time the working class will be up, and they'll be down. And the whole point of that of class struggle is to just have enough so that you can have a working class that can survive. And so that's why the struggle has to continue. There isn't a utopia. There isn't a happy ending. This, I think, was as happy an ending as you could possibly get out of this situation, which is that at least the struggle continues.
On one side, we had this cycle of the little brother having to step up, and he cannot study because he has to work. But at the same time, we have, I think, two characters that go their own way to, continue what they need to do. And before we get to the end, there was something I wanted to mention that I found absolutely wonderful in terms of musicality, my way, but in terms of aesthetic. When you have, for many minutes, this energy of the factory, the machines, this typical old machinery going, and the steam, I thought that was so beautifully done. Just this focusing on the fact that these people are working, but the beauty is the industry, not the worker. Just these machines, the way you see them turning around and turning around, and I thought that was absolutely beautiful, and that they gave it so much space to be displayed.
Had you even heard of this film before I suggested it for this week's episode?
No, I hadn't. I don't necessarily know a lot about European films, especially older films like from the 60s and whatnot, so definitely glad that you suggested it.
We are getting an audience of young filmmakers that have started listening to us this season, as opposed to our previous, last season. The average age of our audience was somewhere in the 60s. We've got enough really young people who are now listening to this that our average age has dropped to somewhere in the 30s. And I want to say something to them, because I do get correspondence asking me about recommending film schools and things like that. Maybe these are the type of films that you should watch. Yes, you should see Fellini's 8.5 and La Dolce Vita. Absolutely you should. But realize that they've been seen by every other new filmmaker that's coming out there, and anything that can be imitated out of them is already, and any influence that they could have is already in the system. Yes, watch, Antonioni's La Ventura. The ending scene of it is heart-wrenching, and the way that the plot shifts from one character to another, hugely influential. But that's the point, it's hugely influential. Perhaps instead you should watch his structural masterpiece, La Notte, which is not been watched by as many people, and you will have an influence of something new, and maybe do something that hasn't been seen before, because you can take that influence and turn it into something new. You can watch Visconti's The Leopard, which has been, diced to death and influenced so many epics, or you can watch his much less watched adaptation of Camus' The Stranger, which is just as beautiful, just as fascinating, and far less influential, and maybe you'll learn something that no one else has. And so if I had any advice for young filmmakers, maybe instead of watching Big Deal on Madonna Street, which that had 3 American remakes, and is cited in every Sight and Sound poll, go to Monticelli's The Organizer, because you will learn more about watching this film than you would from watching every other film that I've mentioned on that list of films that were hugely influential on, say, Scorsese or Coppola, because so few people have seen it. You are going to be able to learn something that maybe that very few people have. On that note, I'm going to move into the closing comments, and we're going to start with Mr. Sheila Brume, and then let Aaron Brown get the last words on Monticelli, The Organizer.
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, I really enjoyed the way the film started, which led me into a very different feeling about what the film was about. For me, it went up and down, and I cannot promise I will do it, not even to myself, but I really should and need to watch it again, because there's a lot of hidden stuff for me. For example, when Mastroianni starts playing the piccolo in this restaurant, and the dynamic between him and the woman, who I didn't know was a sex worker, as it's called these days. It was a very, very interesting film, and I'm very glad that I was able to see it.
Aaron Brown, final thoughts on Monticelli's The Organizer.
I agree with Sela. I need to watch it again. It was really freaking good, and I know I'm going to catch more next time I watch it. I want to throw out something that we didn't discuss, because it's so it's so very specific to my brain. The little bits of culture that are in there about how they're living are fascinating, and the thing that caught me was they go to someone's house and they ask if they've got wine, and she says, no, but we've got vinegar and water. And that's actually an ancient Roman drink. It's called Pasca, and I've actually got a recipe for it. It's really good. It's just vinegar and water and like some honey, and it's so ancient. And to see that they're still drinking it at the end of the 19th century, because they probably still drink it now. I don't know for sure. Obviously, I've never been to Italy, but I love that. Just it's a little bit of connection between humans 2,000 years ago and humans now. So it's totally unrelated to the rest of the film, but I love that it had things that I never thought of, bits of culture I'd never known about or considered. It was just really great. I need to see it again.
And that is exactly an important point, I find, that it's not only that you see more, but you learn very small details about a culture which you happen to know about that. I didn't know about that. I thought they were just explaining, well, we don't have to drink, which means beer, alcohol, but you can have vinegar and water. I didn't realize that was a thing. And I like that very much, that the more you see a film like that, you have a chance even to speak with an Italian, an older person that will tell you, well, the reason they say this, the reason they say that, the reason they do this is because of this, and which you cannot know just by following Mastroianni.
Next week, we're going to continue, we're going to finish our little mini-series on Italy with another comedy, this one from 1967, called China is Near, which, if I were better at pronouncing things in Italian, would make a lot more sense, because in Italian, China and near rhyme. Join us for China is Near. Before we go, where can people find you online at Sila Blume?
Well, right now I am deep into questioning poverty as a term, and doing that in Ecuador, where I have been partly in Quito, but partly in the Amazons, which connects me to this work, things that I was talking about, and I will be exposing some of those thoughts and pictures, of course, in silablume.life. That is my main place of sharing my things online.
I'm on Blue Sky at toadpuppy.bluesky.social, and I just realized that this whole time I've been forgetting to point out that I have a YouTube channel at Pizza Horse Productions. You can, if you want to see any of my short films or goofy editing exercises.
6 years ago, I became a fan of her work on YouTube.
And you didn't remind me to sell it.
I barely
you didn't remind me to tell people about my YouTube channel.
To plug
How
our
dare
stuff. I didn't even plug anything we do last week.
That's fair.
If you want to stalk me, I'm at ETROMMATER on the artist formerly known as Twitter. We're on YouTube at Worlds and Hist. Follow if you're on Apple, write us a review. Blah 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 blah. Plug. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week for China is Near.
Comrades, come on, let's go rally. And the last fight, let us face. The International unites the whole beautiful human race. So, comrades, come on, let's go rally. Ha! And the last fight, let us face.